From secret follower to public defiance, the man who buried a king. In the final hours of Jesus' life, as darkness fell over the city, the men who had promised they would die for him were gone. They'd scattered, hiding in fear, their faith shattered by the brutal reality of a Roman cross. The most loyal disciples were nowhere in sight. The religious leaders who'd engineered the whole thing were savoring their victory. The body of Jesus of Nazareth was left to suffer the fate of a common criminal, to be left on the cross for animals to scavenge, or be thrown into an unmarked ditch, forgotten by history. It was the ultimate humiliation, a final statement that his life and his message meant nothing. But in the shadows of Jerusalem, a quiet revolution of courage was about to begin. And it wouldn't come from the men who had walked with Jesus for 3 years. It would come from a man who had every reason to stay hidden, a man who was part of the very system that had just sent Jesus to his death. This is the story of Joseph of Arimathea. It's the story of how a secret follower, torn between his high-ranking position and the teacher he admired, stepped out of the shadows to give a king the burial no one else would dare. It's a story about one single act of defiance that would change everything. If you appreciate tales of unsung heroes and faith, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light. Section 1. The Councilman in the Shadows. So, who was this Joseph of Arimathea? The Gospels paint a picture of a man with immense status. He was a rich man, sure, but more than that, he was a prominent member of the council, the Sanhedrin. To feel the weight of that title, you have to understand what the Sanhedrin was. This was the supreme court of Jewish life in ancient Israel, a powerful assembly of 71 of the most influential priests and elders. They were the center of Jewish authority, and they were the very group that had plotted to have Jesus arrested and pressured Pontius Pilate to have him crucified. Joseph was one of them. He sat in those halls of power. He heard the plotting. But the Gospel of Luke makes a crucial point. When the council made its deadly decision, Joseph had not consented to their decision and action. He was a dissenting voice, a good man who, as Mark's Gospel tells us, was waiting for the kingdom of God. For years, Joseph had walked a tightrope. The Gospel of John tells us plainly he was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, for fear of the Jewish leaders. He was fascinated by Jesus' teachings, seeing in him the very truth he was sworn to uphold, but he was paralyzed by what he had to lose. To publicly side with a controversial preacher from Galilee, that would have been the end of his career, his reputation, and his place in society. He would have been cast out by his own peers. And so, he stayed in the shadows, his faith a closely guarded secret. It's a struggle many of us can understand. The conflict between what we believe in our hearts and what we're willing to risk in public. He was a man of power, but in the face of his own counsel, he felt powerless. The crucifixion must have felt like a personal failure, the tragic end of a battle he'd been too afraid to fight openly. Section 2. The moment of decision. As the sun began to set on that Friday, the Sabbath was approaching. According to Jewish law, a body couldn't be left exposed overnight. Not even a criminal's. The standard procedure for a crucified enemy of Rome was horrifying. The body was left on the cross to decompose, a public warning to anyone else who dared defy the empire. If burial was allowed at all, it was in a common grave for criminals. For Joseph, this was the breaking point. The disciples were gone, locked away in fear. There was no one left to claim the body. No one to offer Jesus even a shred of dignity in death. All his years of quiet admiration and silent disagreement had led to this single moment. He could stay in the shadows, safe and respected, and let his teacher be dishonored, or he could act. To act meant stepping into the light and publicly identifying with a man just executed for treason. The consequences were huge. He'd be outing himself as a sympathizer, a follower of a man his own council had condemned as a blasphemer. It could cost him his position, his wealth, maybe even his life. You didn't associate with an enemy of the state and get away with it. This is where the story turns. The Gospel of Mark says Joseph took courage and went to Pilate. That phrase is packed with meaning. It wasn't a casual choice. It was a deliberate decision to push fear aside and stand on conviction, no matter the cost. The man who had been silent for years was about to find his voice, not in the council chambers, but in the hostile court of the Roman governor. Section 3. The governor and the unlikely request. Imagine the scene. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, is having a terrible day. He's just been politically outmaneuvered by the Sanhedrin into executing a man he believed was innocent. The last thing he wants is another problem, especially from a Jewish leader. And then, in walks Joseph of Arimathea, a distinguished council member, with an incredible request. He wants the body of Jesus. Pilate is surprised, first, that Jesus is even dead. Crucifixion was a slow, agonizing process, often lasting for days. He calls in the centurion, who confirms it. So now, Pilate has a choice. He didn't have to say yes. While Romans sometimes allowed families to claim a body, it was a rare mercy for a state criminal. Saying no would have been the easy path. But Pilate agrees. Why? Maybe he saw it as one last dig at the Sanhedrin leaders who'd forced his hand giving the body to one of their own who disagreed with them. Perhaps it was his own small way of admitting he thought Jesus was innocent. Or maybe he was just exhausted and wanted the whole affair to be over. Whatever his reason, Pilate gives the order. With that command, Joseph of Arimathea stepped over a line. There was no going back. He had publicly declared his allegiance. He walked out of Pilate's presence no longer a secret disciple, but a marked man, the one who claimed the body of the crucified king. Section 4. An ally steps into the light. Joseph wasn't alone for long. As he made his way to the execution site, another figure emerged from the shadows to join him. Nicodemus. If Joseph's story is one of sudden, explosive courage, Nicodemus's is a slow, steady journey out of the darkness. Like Joseph, he was a Pharisee and a member of the Sanhedrin. We first meet him in the Gospel of John, coming to Jesus under the cover of night, full of questions, wrestling with this idea of being born again. He was a cautious seeker, drawn to the light but afraid to be seen in it. Later, he shows a flicker of boldness. When the Sanhedrin wants to arrest Jesus without a trial, Nicodemus speaks up, reminding them that their own law forbids condemning someone without a hearing. It wasn't a roaring defense, but it was a step. And now, in the darkest hour, Nicodemus takes his final step into the light. He doesn't show up empty-handed. He brings a staggering amount of burial spices, a mixture of myrrh and aloes weighing about 100 pounds. This was an extravagant, almost royal, quantity of spices. It was an act of profound devotion and respect. The man who first came to Jesus by night now stood by him in broad daylight, ready to serve him in death. Together, these two powerful, respected men with everything to lose, gently took Jesus' body down from the cross. The disciples were in hiding, but two members of the Sanhedrin were now doing the work they couldn't. Section 5. The burial of a king. What happened next wasn't the hasty, shameful burial of a criminal. It was the careful, loving preparation for the burial of a king. Joseph had already bought a fine linen shroud. He and Nicodemus took the body of Jesus and, following Jewish burial customs, tenderly wrapped it in the linen cloths with the costly spices. Over 700 years earlier, the prophet Isaiah had written of the Messiah. They made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death. Jesus was executed alongside criminals. But now, against all odds, he was being buried by the rich. The burial site itself was just as significant. The body was taken to a nearby garden where Joseph had a new tomb, one carved out of solid rock. Matthew's gospel specifies it was Joseph's own new tomb, a tomb he had likely prepared for himself, where no one had ever been laid. This wasn't a borrowed plot or a common grave, it was a place of honor. They laid the body inside, and as the women who had followed Jesus watched from a distance, they rolled a great stone across the entrance of the tomb. The task was done. The story could have ended right there. The Bible doesn't tell us what happened to Joseph and Nicodemus. Tradition says they faced persecution, losing their status and wealth for their loyalty. But their true legacy isn't about what they lost, it's about what they secured. By providing a known, wealthy, and sealed tomb, They did more than just offer a dignified burial. They inadvertently set the stage for the most explosive event in history. Think about it. A body dumped in a common grave could be easily dismissed, but a body that vanishes from a sealed, guarded, and well-known tomb? That demands an explanation. Their act of courage provided the unshakable proof for the resurrection. Their status as council members made them the perfect witnesses to the fact that Jesus was truly dead and truly buried. Joseph's story is a powerful reminder that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about acting even when you are. For years, he was silent and afraid. But when the moment came, when all hope seemed lost and everyone else had run, he chose to act. He traded his position for purpose, and in doing so, secured his place in history not as a silent follower, but as the man who defied an empire to bury a king. His journey shows us that faith doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes, the most profound acts of devotion happen in the quiet moments of decision, when the only thing guiding you is what you know to be true in your heart. What does Joseph's quiet courage mean to you? Have you ever felt torn between your faith and your fear? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story inspired you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thanks for watching.